Hi, welcome to the cottage. We are a lively outpouring of an exciting adventure into God's riches, glories in Christ Jesus. We regularly work to activate an excitement for the kingdom of God as it is in the now until it comes into its fullness. We invite you to our sessions to explore the heights and depths of God's love in a fuller bandwidth. I'm Dr. Ken, the pastor of a small independent church seeking to return to the Lord's zeal in times where apathy and lethargy rule the day of the complacent. We try to shake things up and offer a temporary home as we travel this sod until we reach higher ground and connect into the everlasting life from above, here on the earth as it is in heaven. For more information, you can email us at thecottage@dken.cc. That is thecottage@dken.cc.
Hi, welcome back to the cottage. In today's episode, we're going to look at the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 10 and 11 as a precursor to a new series on the life of Abram. So we're going to follow Abraham, and we got to begin in Genesis chapter 10 of all places. So buckle up and we're ready to go for Genesis 10 and 11's the Tower of Babel to introduce this biblical character, Abraham. In today's episode, we're going to cover the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11 as a part of our introduction to Abram. We're going to start a new series on Abraham, and I want you to walk with Abraham in this new series, and I'm pretty excited. And so we covered the Tower of Babel before, so some of this information is going to be review, and I'd encourage you to go back to our other messages where we have gone through some of this information in our earlier episodes. And so we begin with understanding that there are in the Hebrew Bible 3 rebellions. The Jews focus on these 3 rebellions. Now we know the first one. We always talk about it, the fall. In Genesis chapter 3, the serpent from below comes up to usurp authority, and unfortunately, Adam did not do his job and deal with the serpent. Adam was charged in Genesis 2:15 to protect the garden, and he should have thrown out the intruder, but this guy was something special that we talked about in previous episodes. And so Eve is talking to him because he's a deceiver. He's a throne guardian, as talked about in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. And so we discussed all that again in previous episodes. This is a little bit of a review, but the judgment is that humanity is exiled. God sends them out. That's where he wanted them in the beginning. He wanted them to go out and make the rest of the earth the wilderness out there, just like Eden. Go make gardens. Go make. And they were hanging around in the garden. And so he couldn't get them to go out into making the rest of the world as he did. And so it breaks everything that he had set up, the model he set up, and he was sending them out to plant and rejuvenate the whole earth, and they chose not to. And so I'd encourage you again, hopefully you've been checking out all our previous messages, and you'll be able to get the full skinny on those things. We've also talked about Genesis chapter 6, where beings from above, the fallen from above. So we had a fall from Eden, now we have the fallen from above. And again, these beings from above, they come down, and as a result, we have the giants that are produced. And so we have this war that goes on, with the giants, and we learn about them with David and everything. And again, I've covered all that before. And so this is a little bit of a review today. And so you'll have to go back and check those out. But we're just setting the table for understanding the context of Abraham, remember. So after these giants and after this whole thing, God had to start over with a brand new creation and the flood to revert everything back to Genesis 1 and start over. And he's going to start with Noah. And things don't go quite so well with Noah that he has to start again, because in Genesis chapter 10 and 11, we have the Tower of Babel incident. And that's what we want to focus on today. That's what we kind of want to look at. And so as a pretext, a precursor for Abraham coming forth, okay? And so humankind, in this case, Middle Earth, trying to defy the barrier that God had set. So after the flood, God put that bow, that rainbow, as a barrier, saying that no being from heaven is going to come down and disturb you again. Okay, that's not going to happen. And we went through all that. So check out again, go back to our messages. We talked about how in Job it talks about the unclean beings in heaven and how that all rolled out. Okay, and I encourage you to go back and through the previous episodes where we taught all that to you. Okay. As a result, we have the scattering of the nations, about 70 or so, that's listed there in Genesis chapter 10 in the table of nations with confused languages. And now they all are speaking in their own languages. Now, well, remember, we went through Joel chapter 2 at a snail's pace, didn't we? I mean, we went week after week after week through the book of Joel, that prophet. And Joel's prophecy, we went through it slowly, and we talked about this in Joel's prophecy because in Acts chapter 2, we discussed how at Pentecost this is reversed and how God sent people back to those 70 nations to undo what happened here. In the meantime, though, God's got to do something because something takes place that we want to discuss and what happens here. And so we're talking about focusing in as a review what we covered already about the Tower of Babel and this third rebellion as a precursor to understanding the life of Abram, who becomes Abraham, as we know him. And so this is all in Genesis chapter 11, and I would encourage you to dig out Genesis chapter 11 to read the full chapter and see if you can get out some more details and remind you of the things that we've already taught out of this chapter. And we're going to focus in right now on verse 4 to get us started. And they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven." Notice what they're doing. This is all of humanity. They've all gathered in a place called what? Shinar, which is Babylon. They've all gathered in this place of Babylon, where later on we'll learn more and more about Babylon. And throughout the Bible, they gathered there in this valley, Babylon, to build this tower. Why? Because they wanted it to reach its top, to reach unto heaven. And what are they doing here? Well, technically, what they're doing is they want to break that barrier. Remember, we talked about the barrier that God had set, that bow, and they want to break that barrier and pierce up into heaven. Okay. They're piercing up into heaven. All right. And the idea is they're actually, to put it as plain and simple as I can, they're building a stairway to heaven. Not that so they can go up to heaven. They don't want to go to heaven, believe it or not. Kind of matches, a lot of people today. We might think, wow, nobody wants to go to heaven anymore. But anyway, the idea here is that they want to bring God down on their level. Remember, this is Middle Earth, humanity in the middle, rebelling against Yahweh, and they want to bring him down, for him to come down. And what they would do is they would build this building as a stairway for the God to come down, and then God would come and reside in a temple which they had built. So the idea is that they have built him a temple. Now, if you remember in the Bible, in 2 Samuel chapter 7, David wanted to build a temple to God. David had uh, finished everything just like Genesis 1. He had ordered his kingdom. So in Genesis chapter 1, we know in creation, God orders everything in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he set everything up. So now it can go forth as a king would his kingdom. And David does the same thing. Read the story of David all the way up to chapter 7. David is moving from chapter 1 to chapter 7 to get his kingdom in place, to get his administrators in place, all of his, whatever they call them, governors and whatnot, in place to rule, all of his council members. Everybody is in place and ruling. Then he goes off and builds himself a palace, but he is quite sad. He's so sad. Why? Because he wants God to have a house. He sees God in a pathetic tent. He did manage to get the tent and bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. Okay? Through great effort, he deals with that, has a lot of bumps along the way. There was a bump in the road for sure on that one, if you remember what I'm talking about. And so then he brings the presence of God into Jerusalem. Okay. Mount Zion, which God is going to choose to put his name there, and God does. And so David wants to build God a house. And so what happens there, though? God puts him on pause for two reasons. Now, we know the main reason that we understand it, but there's a secondary reason that we don't often realize and we don't know about. The first reason, obviously, he says, you can't build my house because I'm going to build a house out of you, and I'm going to build a dynasty, and through you, the Messiah is going to come. And so we discussed a lot of that during our Christmas series, New Year's time. We go through all that. And so you can check those series out and catch up with that. But the idea was that God was going to make a house out of David. And that's pretty exciting. And so just to think about 2 Samuel chapter 7. So if you want to dig deeper into that, go to 2 Samuel chapter 7 and hallelujah, you will see how that takes place. But the second reason a lot of people don't realize in the ancient world, no man, no, not even the king, could build God anything unless God sanctioned it. God would have to sanction it. As a matter of fact, David is going to secure the trees of Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon, which were considered like a holy forest, and no one could do that. That was very much only for the ancient people in that whole area would only build sacred temples from that, and only the God could allow those trees to be chopped down. And so David doesn't have permission by God to build this temple because it's up to God to mandate it. Now, God does say, I'm going to let your son do it. So God chooses to let Solomon do it. So it's God's prerogative. David cannot. And so, because David cannot, because God didn't ordain or order it, although David had a very good idea on his heart, and God wanted to honor it, and God honored it as much as he could. But he said, no, you're not going to do it, but I will let your son do it. I'm going to have him build the temple. Of course, Solomon does. He gets it. He gets the cedars of Lebanon, and he gets that sacred wood, and he then uses that to build the temple and inaugurate it. And the ark goes in, God goes in, and it's a beautiful, glorious thing that happens all throughout in First Kings in Solomon's reign, and he establishes the very first temple that Israel has. And it was, wow, an amazing thing. Okay. And so that's what you got going on. Okay. In David's time, well, back here in Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, they want to build the tower. And so they do. They're constructing it. They haven't discussed the God. Now, remember, the tower is not a temple. The tower is a stairway to heaven so the God will come down and go inside the temple. Okay? So they want to build the tower that reaches to heaven. And so they said, let us make a name for ourselves, at least we be scattered abroad from the face of the whole earth. And so here's a depiction of an ancient pyramid style building that kind of is modeled off of this idea, the concept. Notice the levels, how it just gets, higher and higher and it steps up. It reminds me of the mountains in Nepal, how they do the terraces and how they grow their rice along the terraces. Okay. Kind of reminds me of that. So it's a man made mountain, right? Well, here's a depiction that we have computer generated that people who understand the Tower of Babel and everything from the ancient world, how this would have gone down, this is a modern depiction, a computer generated depiction of how it would have possibly been built. It gives us a pretty good picture of the way things were. Notice they have the stairs for the people are going up and down, just to give you a depiction of what it would look like so people could get a view of heaven. They could get up there, they'd be closer to the stars, they could see, and they could get closer to heaven. And that was the idea. But the main idea was, again, for the stairway was actually for the God to make a descent down this tower. Okay, make a descent down this tower and come inside of the temple. So they're giving access, paving the way for God to come down. Okay, but God hadn't designed it. He didn't command this. And so they say, we're going to do this and we're going to order God and God's going to order and like we got the remote, we're going to control everything. And God's just going to have to, listen to us. And he's going to come down inside of our temple and he's going to do what we say. And so that's why it's a rebellion, because they are actually trying to usurp God. And so this is what you see here. Now, I've done this before in previous episodes, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on this slide, but this will give you an idea about the size of the animals there and the things that are going on, and how it's supposed to be up in the clouds. And they're building a man-made mountain. We're God. We can build our own mountain, even though God made the mountains. We can build our own mountain. Okay. That's what they think. Of course, this structure probably would have been along the size of, there's the Great Pyramid down there at the bottom. You see Giza and you see its height, and the Tower of Babel, probably what it would have been like. And then it's compared to the uh, Monadnock building, in Chicago, which was the tallest brick structure ever made. And so I showed you pictures of that in a previous episode and went through all that. And you see an American football field to just give you an idea of the size of this. Okay. But here again, they believe that the deities dwelt on high places. And so, anywhere you got to get up and say, the mountains, maybe here are not the same. But the mountains in Israel, because it's such a dry, arid place, the higher you go up the mountain, the better it is, the greener it is, the more life there is. And so that when they would make a climb up to the mountain, they begin to experience more life and they begin to think that they were getting closer and closer to God. And so it's where heaven and earth meet. Remember that. It's where heaven and earth meet at, at the mountains. And so they're building their own. And they want to actually pierce up there and try to break through, and then they're trying to usurp God's authority and make him come down on their terms and come down inside their temple. Now, interestingly to note, there's unlike the pyramids, there's nothing inside this structure. Okay, these structures, there was nothing inside them. They're building a mountain. It's not, they don't have anything inside. They're building a temple that's attached to this, that the God is supposed to then come down and get inside the temple. So they're helping God out. Like he needs help, he needs a way to come down. So we're going to build a way. And of course, that's just their thinking. It's pretty strange thinking. I know, but we're trying to understand Genesis chapter 11, and this whole story gives us an understanding of how they thought about it. We're trying to read it according to what they understood, okay? And so this is what we got going on here, as amazing as it is, okay? And so they're wanting God to come down. Of course, he does come down. If you read the rest of the verses, we're going to skip down to verse 8, but he does come down to look at what they're doing, and he ends up scattering them. It says here, so the Lord God scattered them from abroad, from thence upon the face of all the earth. And we went through these scriptures before. We talked about Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9, how the people have been scattered. Okay. So we talked about that. We went through all of that. Okay. And so they were scattered at this time in Genesis chapter 10, Genesis chapter 11, and they're scattered. And Genesis 10 shows you the places they were scattered to. And then God lets other spiritual beings be over them. So he kind of gives the people, the nation, okay, certain people groups, their nation, and they go off and do their own thing with another spirit that is God to them. And they worship that God. And so they're going to do their own thing. They don't want Yahweh, the Most High God, the sovereign God. They don't want to bow down to him. No, they want some other kind of spirit that they can control, or that spirit can control them. And it's a mess. And so they go off. And according to, we discussed in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 19, that these spirits were never to be worshiped. No one in the Bible was ever to be worshiped other than God. And he's not. Even, in Revelation, when, John's overwhelmed, or Daniel's overwhelmed a few times too, but John is overwhelmed, and the angel says, hey, listen, buddy, I know you're overwhelmed at the presence of God, but you can't fall down here, because you ain't going to worship me. No way. I ain't taking a chance. I ain't monkeying around like those other angels did that rebelled. And we talked about that. before, how the other angels rebelled. We went through Job and chapter 15, and we discussed about those things again in previous episodes. So go back to our earlier messages, and you'll be able to understand that. But what we're trying to deal with here is a review so that we can set up Abraham. And so God scatters them, and they go off and they allow other gods to be over them instead of Yahweh. And so they're like, we just going to deal with him. Who can talk to the president? Who can get a meeting with the president? So, trying to get a hold of your congressman sometimes is very difficult, right? So who can, it's ridiculous. So, I mean, come on, So they go off to other people, and they're going to do their own thing because they want to do it their own way. And so they left off to build the city. Therefore, the name is called Babel, because the Lord did confound the language of all the earth. So everyone's now not speaking the same language. They've gone off to their own places. They have their own gods that they worship, and they bow down to them, and they do their own thing. Okay. And from thence did the Lord God scatter them abroad from all the face of the earth. And then, interestingly enough, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 9, that we discussed before, says, and then God chooses Jacob. Okay, well, how did God choose Jacob? And that's what we're going to do. Here, we're going to begin with Abraham, because it's through Abram. So he tried with Adam, and things didn't go well with Adam and the first family. That was crazy stuff going on there with Cain killing Abel, and we went through that recently in our holiday series over Christmas and New Year's. And so then Noah, we talked about in the second rebellion and the flood. After Noah, things, wasn't the greatest either, So we got that going on. So now these people in the third rebellion are scattered. And so God has to do, and he's going to choose Israel. He's going to choose Jacob. He's going to choose a family. He's going to choose a family. But before he chooses a family, he's going to choose a man, and he chooses Abram. And so it's so it's interesting here in chapter 27 that we get introduced to Abram. And so that's why I wanted to show you this, that the beginning of Abraham is in Genesis chapter 11, mixed in with the story of the Tower of Babel. And so we have Genesis. We talked about this all over the holidays. We'll go back to our Christmas and New Year's messages, but we talked about how Genesis chapter 2 is a genealogy and this generations of. And then we have another one in Genesis chapter 5 with, after Cain kills Abel. So then God again sets up generations. And so there are many of these. There's about 11 or so scattered throughout the book of Genesis, and they divide it all up. There's 10 or 11 of these, and they divide them all up in these sections. And now we have a new section of genealogies. And the genealogies are dividing points in the book. And so we have a new dividing point because we're trying to focus on something new. But what's interesting is at the end of chapter 11 is this place where we have Abram. And so in verse 27, they talk about this generation, and they're trying to make a connection from Adam and from Noah and tell you where we're at now in history. And it gets down to verse 27. Now, these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Okay? Terah is Abraham's father. Okay? Abram's father. Okay? So we know that Abram is the son of Terah. He has two brothers, Nahor and Haran. We're not going to cover it in these verses, but you can read on the rest of Genesis 11, and you'll find out that Haran passes away. But Haran had a son named Lot, and you may be familiar with Abraham and Lot. And so we're going to focus, though, on, like I said, the key here is Abram, and he's in Genesis chapter 11, along with the rest of this story from Babel. Now, skipping down to verse 31. And Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, who'd passed, his son's son, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law. Now, this is again Terah, his son, Abraham's wife. So Sarai is Abram's wife. And they went forth with them from the of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came into Haran and dwelt there. And so I want to cover that. Okay. I wanted to show you and you see what's going on here. Okay. I want you to see that they come from the of Chaldees as they're going into the land of Canaan, and they came unto Haran and dwelt there. And so there you see the of the Chaldees there at the top in the center, circled in red, and they're heading toward Haran. Now, there's other people that talk about this other that's over my right shoulder here, left shoulder, I'm sorry. So over my left shoulder. And so you have that but we really don't believe that that's the We think that it's actually the that's at the top of the map here, depicted for you, for those who are able to see the videos on Spotify app. Spotify allows us to have video content, and so you get the slides if you watch on Spotify. So you just have to get into the Spotify app on your smart TV or on your smartphone or whatever. And if you use Spotify, you're going to get the Spotify app and you can see the slides. And so we have a map here, and we've been showing pictures of the Tower of Babel. So maybe people are not catching that when in the podcast listening, but if you watch it on Spotify, you can catch up the video. So I apologize, I didn't mention that earlier. But anyway, the of the Chaldeans, okay, is right there at the top, and then you see Haran, and I'm guessing that's roughly about 175 miles or so as the crow flies from to Haran. And then Haran is going to go all the way into Abraham is going to go into the promised land until he arrives at Shechem. Okay, Shechem. And eventually he's going to arrive at Beer Lahai Roy. And so you see the journeys there that they all make and different ones. And so Abraham's servant, if you'll see the brown arrow, Eliezer is going to bring Rebekah from Padan Aram, Haran, to marry Isaac in Genesis 24. That's the brown arrow. Okay, and that's important because that helps us identify which that Abraham and his family came from, because that's in Genesis chapter 24. Earlier in the is chapter 24, verses 2 and 4, 2 through 4. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house that ruled over all that he had, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh. This is Eliezer. And I will make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven. He's God over all that's in heaven, all those spiritual beings, and the God of the earth. He's also over everything on earth. So this is the most high God, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites. So Abram does not want Isaac, his one and only son, to do what? Marry someone from Canaan, because these people don't worship Yahweh. They worship another God. I don't want them and him getting married. Are you crazy? Among whom I dwell. So I'm dwelling here in the Canaanites. I do not want my son. No, he needs to go back home. So, but thou shalt go into my country, go back home where I'm from, and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my for my son Isaac. And of course, we see where Eliezer went. He went to Haran. So he went to Haran. You'll see that. And the idea, and again, Jacob is the arrow in white, where Jacob leaves. Later on in Genesis, he's going to leave and he's going to go to Haran and come back from Haran. Okay, so you'll see that there. Okay, but Eliezer makes the trip and he goes up there, but he comes back from Haran. And so that's depicted with the brown arrow on the map. And so you'll see that they are going to Haran. This is where, and then it says, that's where my country, that's where I'm from. I'm from that place. And of course, you see that that's the of the Chaldeans. Okay, so we're setting up all this geography and setting up all this background information that all the nations in Genesis chapter 10 and 11 rebelled. All the peoples rebelled. Okay, and because they rebelled, what happens? Okay, what happens? They rebelled, so what happens? They turn to other gods and they begin to worship them like they're supposed to worship Yahweh, but they begin to worship them. That's what's going on. Okay, they go back and worship other gods. And then God calls Abram, and Abram is going to worship the one true God. And he says, I am going to then give you a land. I'm going to give you a nation. I'm going to make of you a people. And that's why we're striving to get to chapter 12 so we can see what God's doing. So the beginnings of this is where Abram came from. And that's what I wanted to lay the foundation in this episode, in this message. I wanted to lay the foundation for where Abram's at. Okay? I wanted you to be able to see that in this episode, where he came from and the context. He came out of Genesis chapter 10 and 11. Okay, that's the context that he came out of this chapter, where all the other nations are worshiping other gods. So the people have been scattered and they're all worshiping other gods. And then what does he do? Okay, now down here, like I said, above my left shoulder here, right here, you're going to see that's where they did the Tower of Babel, because Babylon is right just north of So that area right there, Babylon, just north of that okay, and Babylon is on my right shoulder now, so you can see that up there, my right shoulder. You can see Babylon, and that's where the Tower of Babel was from, and they're scattered. And so Abram and his family end up north there at the top of your screen in of the Chaldeans. Okay, and then his father, Terah, moves the family from the of the Chaldeans to Haran, and Haran is at Haran, where God is going to call Abraham. Okay, you see that brown dot, Haran. Okay, that is where God's going to call Abraham. So when we dive into chapter 12, when we get into the story of Abraham, I wanted you to be able to have this episode as a background to Abraham, so that when I go through and say these things, you'll be familiar with this and be able to refer back to this and understand the context for the story of Abraham, because everybody else is doing their own thing. Everybody else has chosen lesser things and they're doing their own thing. They're not doing God. They're doing other things. We've talked about that. How many times have we said, how is it that the people in America are all caught up in the lesser things, and they're all caught up in the lesser things? And so they're going after these lesser things, whatever it may be, they're excited about. Right now, what is it? I guess it's the NFL playoffs, right? Football. That's the big excitement thing. All right. Everybody's all about football. That's the God we're worshiping right now. So whatever. We just finished Santa Claus, whatever, all these lesser things that are not as important to us. Okay. And we set aside those most important things. And so I wanted you to see that they're all going after in Genesis 10 and 11. It's an actual rebellion. Like I said, the Jews focus on 3 rebellions. We often only focus on the Genesis chapter 3 rebellion. We only focus on the one, but that's just our focus. But God's people, the Jews, those of the Old Testament, they understood 3 rebellions. The three rebellions. And so this is a key component now. They have, and it comes from 3 different areas, from down below, from up above, and right here in the middle. Okay, so it covers all areas. So all areas have failed, all have fallen. And so that's where it's just making sure, kind of like putting those exclamation points behind the sentence. Okay, so that's what we have here. We have the failure of all 3, and then God is going to deal with that. And how does he choose that? Well, as I told you, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 9, he chose Jacob as his inheritance, his lot. Well, how does he choose Jacob as his portion? He chooses Jacob as his portion through Abram. So he begins by Abram right here in Genesis chapter 12. He's going to do the very next thing it says on this map. He's going to call Abraham. He's going to call Abraham. So where is Abraham in Genesis chapter 12? Well, he's right there at Haran on the map. I'm showing you the dot. He's at Haran. Okay, so when we get to Abraham and the chapter 12 on Abraham and the call, it's amazing. And Abraham is there at Haran, and he gets called by God. And that's exciting. And I want you to understand where he's at. So I wanted to show you this. I think it's exciting for me. Again, you know me with all the Bible and the studies I've done. I think it's exciting to be able to see where Abram's coming from. So you can see it, you can watch it, and you can know where he's coming from. And then the other people who have been to Haran, including Eliezer, who gets the wife there. Because remember, Nahor's there. Okay, Nahor's there, and he's going to have children. And so Jacob is going to be going there to deal with Nahor's family. Okay, so this is where they're all at. They left the Ur of Chaldees and they made it to Haran. And it's Abram that's then going to make it. And he's going to end up in the promised land. And he's going to map it all out. And God is going to say, wherever your feet goes, I'm going to give you. And it's amazing. And even Abraham ends up in Egypt. So we're got a lot of stuff to cover that's coming up and how we're going to understand these things. Looking forward to you understanding more about the life of Abram. God bless you. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this broadcast. You can find out more about us at dken.cc. That's DKEN.cc. We look forward to seeing you next time. God bless you.